I want to talk about the ATF and how they conducted a raid, not a search warrant. All right, so the ATF, in my point of view, is a military organization, not a police force. And here's why. They literally conducted a raid on this one individual in a suburban area who makes over $200,000 a year. They basically kicked in his door after disabling the camera, and they assaulted this man's house and then shot him in the head. Maybe that's why the Democrats and the left want to call it assault weapons, because they're using the exact same weapons that I want in my house to defend it. But that's besides the point. Why do I call it a raid? Well, I'm pretty well versed in raids, and doctrinally, this was at least an assault element of a raid. Yes, they didn't have a support by fire. I'm sure they had security out to stop people from, getting to the house or whatever, right? So you're supposed to have security, support, and assault, right? Those are the three elements. This is all in, I don't know what they call it nowadays, but this is all in it used to be in 7-8. It also used to be in, or it is in the Ranger Handbook for sure. So if you want to go, fact check me on this, go ahead. So what I'm talking about, the FM 7-8, which they call it something else nowadays, but it's the same stuff. And the Ranger Handbook are military documents, you see. They're open source information. You can go check it out for yourself. So this isn't a combat operation, so they didn't have to have a support by fire. But who knows? Maybe they did. Maybe they did. A support by fire could have been a sniper. It could have been a machine gun. It could have been a mortar. It could have been whatever. I assume that they had some kind of sniper element as a support by fire in the event that there was some kind of a firefight. Let's back up and look at the time that they assembled. They assembled prior to actually raiding the house. What were they doing there? Well, in the infantry, the term is called an objective rally point, an ORP, if you will. The ORP is where you prepare all of your equipment for the specific objective you're going after. That's important here, right? They didn't leave the office and go directly to the house. They left their office or their house or wherever they left, and they assembled, they rallied in a Walmart parking lot to go over the plan one more time, prepare equipment. That's obviously checking your primary firearm, checking your secondary firearm, making sure your batteries are good to go. If you had some kind of explosive, you'd have an explosive with you to gain entry to the house. This isn't combat, so they didn't have, I assume they didn't have explosives to gain entry into the house. But what they did have is they probably had some kind of mechanical device to defeat the door. And that tape, that's right, they had that tape prepared. If you look at the video, they had that tape ready to go. They knew that they had to put tape on the door. So what does that tell you? That tells you that they did part or some what's called troop leading procedures. So troop leading procedures, at least the first couple, receive the mission, issue a warning order, then conduct reconnaissance. They conducted reconnaissance on this house. They had to have. They know where the house is. They know where they'll assemble. They know exactly where they needed to put the tape for the camera. Maybe they did it physically or maybe they did it virtually, but they did some kind of reconnaissance before going to the house, receive the mission, issue a warning order, conduct reconnaissance. Those are super, super important to understand when watching that video or videos of this raid the ATF conducted on this one individual. That was not a police force. That was a military it had all the elements of a military unit. I understand they're classified as a police force, but the reason why they're classified as a police force because the military can't actually arrest anyone in the United States unless there's some kind of congressional thing. I don't know all the legalities, but I do know the military cannot arrest people, and they cannot go and seize houses, and they cannot do any of these things in the United States. You have to have law enforcement. So ATF is classified as law enforcement, but I believe they're a military organization, not a police force. So, okay, so what about the execution of this raid? If you look at the video, and as I said in my last video, they stacked up on this guy's door like he was some kind of top-end terrorist, cell leader, or organizer, or maybe a suicide, or a bomb maker, or something of that nature. Someone who was extremely dangerous. Extremely dangerous. That's where we are, and that's what's concerning, is because the ATF felt they needed to raid this guy's house, and in the middle of the night, actually, not in the middle of the night, it's like in the morning, stand to time. If you don't know what stand to is, basically that's when the Indians would attack back in the day. And so stand to was like, well, you had to get up out of bed, out of your fart sack, and start pulling security because the Indians are coming. So you need to be able to defend the perimeter. Okay, that's basically what stand to is. And that's the time that the ATF decided to do this raid, because they knew that this cat, they knew his schedule probably, they knew his pattern of life, they knew where he was going, when he was going there, what he was doing. They knew what was happening with him, 100%. And if you're watching this video and you're like, well, maybe he shouldn't have been selling firearms illegally. Okay, fine, gotcha. But did he deserve to die for it? No, he didn't deserve to die for it. And his wife didn't deserve to see him get shot in the freaking nugget. This was an American. So if that tells you anywhere where we are today in America, when the ATF goes in and raids a house in the early morning hours before the sun comes up and shoots this guy in the nugget who is supposedly defending himself, okay, because he thinks somebody's breaking into his house, which honestly, in all reality, somebody did break into his house, okay? It just happened to be quote-unquote law enforcement. And then he gets shot in the face in front of his wife over selling a couple of firearms. Oh, excuse me, ATF actually sent a bunch of firearms down to Mexico and lost track of them. Fucking idiots. I'm a little bit amped up because our country is there's something going on. There's something going on with this whole ATF debacle. It's not only that. It's not only the raid, right? It's the all-out blitzkrieg on the Second Amendment. The raid is part of it, of course. And regardless of what you think of Donald J. Trump, you have to think to yourself, why are they going after this man so hard? For the last 4 years, they've done nothing but hammer that man down. And he still stands strong. So kudos to him, man. So if there's one reason to vote for Donald Trump, is that he's a strong man. He's a very strong individual. Because most people will collapse with the things that he's been faced with. In this last ruling where he was charged and found guilty on, 34 felony charges, where no one was hurt. The banks got their money back. This is the first time it's happened in New York. The federal government didn't even charge Donald Trump with any of these. It was the state of New York that charged him. Then he got convicted of these 34. All of them, really? All of them? If the jury was to come back and say, look, he's guilty of these 5, but not these, or these 10 and not these, or whatever, I'm like, okay, maybe they were a fair jury, but that was not a fair jury. There's no way. In addition, I would argue that Donald Trump did not have a jury of his peers. Anyway, you have all the Trump thing and this ATF stuff. And then the other thing that's really concerning is that a black man in New York was making his own firearms. And then New York decided to make a law where he couldn't. And then before he could, but then he couldn't. Anyway, he just got locked up for 10 years. Pending appeal, of course. 10 years for making his own firearms. He had no criminal record. He literally had a hobby. He didn't even shoot him, as far as I could tell from any research. Didn't even shoot him. And the FBI, SWAT, and the ATF raided his house. Luckily, this black man didn't fight back because he would have been shot too. Seized his firearms, put him through a legal challenge, a legal battle. And then the judge ultimately told the lawyer that this is New York. Don't bring the Second Amendment in my courtroom. This is New York. I fear that this country is going into a black hole.